Sparta, a history of discipline and will. Introduction: a city in the silence of stone. Welcome to Bedtime Lectures. Tonight, we journey to Sparta, a city shaped not by marble, but by discipline. Between the mountains and the river, it stood quiet and austere. Here, silence was strength and hardship a lesson. Boys were trained to endure, girls to stand tall. Laws lived in memory, not on stone. Walls were not needed. The people were enough. Sparta did not seek glory. It demanded purpose. And in that purpose, it found something lasting. This is not a story of conquest. It is a meditation on will. Let us begin. Chapter 1. The Land of Lacedaemon. To understand Sparta, one must begin with its land. Laconia, in the southeastern Peloponnese, is bounded by the Taygetus Mountains to the west and the Parnon to the east. These ranges are steep, ancient, and often snow-capped. Between them flows the Eurotas River, a narrow, cold stream fed by mountain springs. The region is rugged and austere, unlike the fertile plains of northern Greece. It demands endurance and discipline from those who dwell there. This environment shaped the Spartan character. The land did not yield easily, and so its people valued simplicity, self-reliance, and resilience. The scarcity of resources fostered a culture that discouraged luxury. The physical demands of farming and survival instilled strength and perseverance. Sparta did not seek the sea, though the Laconian Gulf was within reach. Unlike other Greek city-states that turned outward, building fleets and seeking colonies, Sparta remained focused inward. Its priorities were domestic, to cultivate a disciplined society capable of enduring hardship and defending its homeland. The city's location in a valley rather than on a hill like Athens symbolized its philosophy. Sparta built no grand acropolis, no marble temples to impress visitors. Its power lay not in stone monuments, but in the strength of its citizens. The mountains served as natural defenses, discouraging invasion and contributing to the city's isolation. Ancient myths also tie Sparta to its geography. Taygetus was named for a mythic daughter of Atlas. The Eurotas River, according to legend, was once a man. Leda, queen of Sparta, bore Helen, later Helen of Troy, said to be the most beautiful woman in the world. Her brothers Castor and Pollux were revered across Greece. These stories, rooted in place, added depth to Spartan identity. Spartan society developed without the visual grandeur of Athens or Corinth. It invested not in statues, but in training. Wealth was used not for luxury, but for sustaining a strict, militarized society. Even the absence of city walls reflected this ethos. Spartans believed their real defense was the courage of their warriors. In many ways, the land itself was the first teacher. Before the Agoge, the rigorous education system for boys, there was the valley, the cold river, the rocky hills. These taught lessons of discipline, silence, and perseverance. The landscape shaped not only how Spartans lived, but what they valued. In contrast to the ornate expressions of other cultures, Spartan values were austere: endurance, obedience, loyalty, and restraint. This geography laid the foundation for a unique society, inward-looking, tough, and tightly ordered. Even today, few ruins remain in Sparta. The city left behind no Parthenon. But in the stones and hills of Laconia, one can still sense the presence of a people who lived by will rather than wealth. Sparta's power was quiet. Its influence was measured not in monuments, but in memory. And so, as we leave this land behind, we prepare to meet the mind that gave it form, Lycurgus, the lawgiver who shaped Spartan society. His vision turned this rugged land into a living discipline, a place where silence was strength and law was life. Sleep now, if you wish. Let the mountains fade into shadow. The story continues, not in marble, but in the marrow of men. Chapter 2. The Birth of Sparta, Between Legend and Law. The story of Sparta's birth as a distinct and disciplined society cannot be told without Lycurgus, the semi-mythical lawgiver whose name is etched into the very fabric of Spartan identity. He is both a man and a symbol of reform, order, and the rejection of luxury. Historical records about Lycurgus are sparse and often contradictory. According to Plutarch, he may have lived in the 9th century BCE or perhaps in the 7th. Some claimed he traveled widely to Crete, Egypt, and even to Ionia, gathering ideas for a new legal and moral code. Others believed he received his laws directly from the Oracle of Delphi. Some said he was never real at all, but the impact of his reforms, whether mythic or historical, was real and lasting. When Lycurgus returned to Sparta, the city was in disarray. Like many Greek polis, it was rife with inequality, factional strife, and excess. Sparta had known war and wealth, but it had not yet discovered its soul. Lycurgus set out to change that. He began not with buildings, but with laws. The reforms attributed to him are known collectively as the Great Retra. This was a constitution delivered orally, a deliberate rejection of written law which could be manipulated or ignored. Oral law, passed down in memory, demanded personal discipline. The Retra reorganized the state into 3 main bodies: the kings, the Gerousia, Council of Elders, and the Apella, Assembly of Citizens. 2 hereditary kings would rule concurrently, providing balance and continuity. The Gerousia, made up of men over 60, would propose laws and advise the kings. The Apella could vote, but not debate. This structure reinforced hierarchy, seniority, and obedience. Lycurgus also divided land equally among citizens, eliminating wealth disparities that had destabilized earlier generations. He banned the use of gold and silver coins, replacing them with heavy iron bars, a form of currency so cumbersome it discouraged theft and extravagance. Trade declined, but so did greed. Foreign luxuries were banned. Arts that encouraged individual fame or soft living were discouraged. Music and poetry existed, but they served the state, not the self. Perhaps his most famous and enduring reform was the Agoge, the rigorous educational and training system for Spartan boys. Children were taken from their homes at age 7 and placed under state supervision. They learned to endure pain, hunger, cold, and silence. They were taught to steal, but punished if caught, not for the theft, but for failure. They slept on reeds, walked barefoot, and wore a single cloak year-round. The goal was not cruelty, but resilience. Girls, too, were trained, though differently. Spartan women were expected to be strong, healthy, and vocal. They exercised publicly, married later than other Greek women, and held unusual influence in the household and community. Lycurgus believed that strong women would bear strong sons, a belief backed by the rigorous role women played in raising and judging men. Marriage was also regulated. Husbands and wives saw little of each other in early marriage, keeping passions subdued. The state's interest in reproduction was utilitarian. Children were inspected at birth. Those deemed weak or sickly were exposed, left to die. This brutal policy was seen as necessary to maintain the strength of the citizen body. These reforms were not universally welcomed. According to tradition, Lycurgus faced resistance, but he remained steadfast. After implementing his changes, he told the people he would travel to Delphi to seek the oracle's blessing and instructed them not to change the laws until his return. He never returned. Whether by design or fate, his disappearance became part of the myth, a lawgiver who sacrificed himself to ensure the permanence of his laws. The laws of Lycurgus were not written in stone, but in habit and belief. They shaped not only governance, but the very soul of Sparta. He transformed the city into a society that worshiped discipline, silence, and unity. These values would endure for centuries. Lycurgus's Sparta was not a democracy, nor an oligarchy in the Athenian sense. It was a hybrid, carefully engineered to suppress individual ambition and elevate the collective. Loyalty to the state superseded all else. In modern eyes, these reforms may seem harsh, even inhumane, but within the context of their time, a fragmented, war-torn Greece, they offered stability, identity, and strength. Sparta became a place apart, respected, feared, and often misunderstood. With the framework of its laws in place, Sparta would now build not upward like the marble cities of Athens, but inward into the hearts and bodies of its people. And so, from legend and law, the true Sparta emerged, austere, silent, and enduring. As the night deepens, we leave the lawgiver's shadow and turn to the children he shaped, to the boys who were taken from their mothers and the girls who watched them go. In the next chapter, we enter the Agoge. There, the lessons of Lycurgus come to life. Rest if you wish. The march has only begun. Chapter 3. Childhood in Bronze. To understand the core of Spartan discipline, one must enter the world of the Agoge, the structured, relentless system of education that turned boys into soldiers and citizens. The Agoge was not just a training program, it was the foundation of Spartan society, designed to mold every male citizen from the age of 7 into a being of endurance, obedience, and unwavering loyalty to the state. At the age of 7, boys were taken from their homes and enrolled in state-run barracks. From this point on, their lives would be controlled by the polis. Parental affection was replaced with communal rigor. The bond between mother and son was severed by the needs of the state. The young initiates were organized into packs called agili, which functioned like squads or dormitories. They were supervised by older boys and a paidonomos, a state-appointed officer responsible for enforcing discipline. There was no privacy, no indulgence, and no softness. Boys shared everything: food, beds, punishments, and victories. Education focused on endurance and simplicity. Reading and writing were taught, but minimally. Far more important were physical fitness, combat readiness, and group cohesion. Boys were routinely underfed and encouraged to steal food to survive. But they were punished if caught, not for the theft itself, but for failing to do it well. This taught cunning, stealth, and consequence. Punishments were severe and often public. Whippings were routine, and silence under pain was a mark of honor. During the festival of Artemis Orthia, boys were flogged before the altar in a brutal rite of passage. Some died, but those who endured earned public respect. Clothing was minimal, a single cloak, year-round. They went barefoot to toughen their feet. Beds were made from reeds gathered by hand. Cleanliness, modesty, and restraint were demanded. The intention was not to break the boys, but to sculpt them. Peer bonds were essential. Each boy was paired with an older mentor, often forming a homoerotic relationship, typical of many Greek city-states, though in Sparta the emotional and pedagogical aspects often outweighed the romantic. These relationships reinforced loyalty and accountability. As they aged, boys advanced through stages. At age 12, training intensified. At age 18, they joined the Cryptia, a secretive organization where select youths were sent into the countryside to live off the land and, reportedly, to terrorize or kill helots. This rite, shrouded in mystery, was both psychological conditioning and a tool of social control. The Agoge did not simply train warriors, it forged citizens. By the time a boy reached 20, he could apply for full membership in a syssitia, a communal mess hall composed of about 15 men. Admission was not guaranteed. Each member had to be accepted by unanimous vote, reinforcing conformity and group allegiance. If rejected, a man lived in disgrace and could not gain full citizenship. Girls were not part of the Agoge, but they too received public education. unique in the Greek world. They trained in athletics, running, wrestling, and throwing the javelin. Physical strength was linked to reproductive health, and Sparta needed strong mothers to bear strong sons. Spartan girls also learned music and dance, often performing in public ceremonies. Their freedom and outspokenness shocked outsiders, but within Sparta it was expected. The ultimate goal of the Agoge was to create the homios, the Spartan citizen of full standing, equal in rights and responsibilities. These were not individualists. They were molded into units of a whole. Self-interest was seen as weakness. Discipline, obedience, and readiness for war were the highest virtues. Many boys did not survive the Agoge. Death, injury, and expulsion for failure were not uncommon. But those who did emerge were among the most disciplined fighters of the ancient world. This educational system was supported by the entire social structure of Sparta. The helots farmed the land, providing food so the Spartiate class could focus on warfare. Perioikoi, the free but non-citizen inhabitants, filled the gaps in commerce and craftsmanship. This division allowed Sparta to maintain its rigid training system without economic collapse. Critics, both ancient and modern, have called the Agoge cruel and dehumanizing. And indeed, by today's standards, it was. But it must be seen in its historical context, a fragmented, violent world where survival depended on discipline more than democracy. The Agoge created not just warriors, but a shared identity. A man trained in the Agoge did not fight for himself or even for glory. He fought for the phalanx, the shield wall of his brothers, and for the legacy of a people who believed that silence, strength, and sacrifice were the pillars of greatness. With the Agoge complete, the Spartan citizen was ready to take his place among equals, but life was far from settled. The next chapter leads us into adulthood, into the life of the hoplite, the rituals of the syssitia, and the quiet endurance of men always ready for war. Rest if you wish. The training never ends. But you may close your eyes now. Others will keep watch. Chapter 4. Women of Sparta. In the ancient world, few women stood with such presence as those of Sparta. In a society built upon silence, obedience, and strength, Spartan women became the unexpected voice, firm, free, and unafraid. While men trained, fought, and died for the polis, women shaped the foundation on which that discipline stood. Unlike their counterparts in Athens or Corinth, Spartan women lived public lives. They moved freely, spoke openly, and were educated. Their role was not confined to the private sphere. Instead, it was intertwined with the very soul of Sparta's survival. From a young age, girls were trained physically. They ran, wrestled, and threw javelins. Their bodies were prepared not for war, but for motherhood, for bearing sons who could withstand the Agoge, and daughters who would one day do the same. Fitness was not vanity, it was patriotism. They wore short tunics, exercised in view of others, and competed in athletic festivals. To the rest of Greece, this was scandalous, but to the Spartans, it was necessary. A healthy woman was a strong mother. A strong mother built a strong state. Marriage in Sparta came later than in most Greek cities. Girls married in their late teens or early 20s, once their bodies were mature and minds formed. Marriages were often arranged, but they did not silence the women involved. In fact, many Spartan wives held authority in the household, managed estates, and even owned land, a rarity in the ancient world. In war, Spartan women did not wield weapons, but their words were sharper than iron. They are remembered for laconic sayings, brief, powerful expressions of expectation and pride. Come back with your shield, or on it. You gave birth to him, not to yourself. Sparta does not ask how many, but where. These were not simply slogans, they were instructions. To be a Spartan woman was to hold the line at home, to carry grief without collapse, and to love not with softness, but with strength. Mothers raised their sons for the state. Wives watched their husbands go to war without weeping. Widows stood in silence beside empty hearths. Grief was permitted, but not indulgence. Public displays of despair were considered shameful. Dignity was duty. Women in Sparta could inherit and manage property, a legal and economic power rare in the Greek world. Some estimates suggest that at certain periods they controlled up to 40% of Spartan land. This was not feminism in the modern sense, but a functional necessity. The men were at war, and the city could not run without its women. They had no vote in the Apella, no seat on the Gerousia, but their influence was real. They shaped values, judged character, and enforced cultural norms. A disapproving glance from a Spartan mother could cut deeper than a soldier's sword. They were also the custodians of Spartan memory. Songs, rituals, and family lineages passed through them. At festivals, they led choral performances and rites of fertility. In religion, they played prominent roles. The duality of Spartan culture, its rigid discipline and intense pride, flowed through the voices of its women. Even foreign observers, such as Aristotle, remarked on the unusual freedom and power of Spartan women. But he did not praise it. He feared it. To outsiders, the strength of these women seemed unnatural. But to Sparta, it was indispensable. In a land where boys were forged into warriors and men lived to die in war, women became the keepers of continuity. They ensured that the discipline did not fade, that the law was remembered, and that the spirit of the city outlived its soldiers. Their legacy is not built in marble statues or epic poems. It lives in the unbroken gaze, in the silence of mourning, and in the unspoken strength passed from mother to child. As the chapter closes, we leave behind the hearth and turn once more to the field. For while the women held the city, the men prepared to defend it. In the next chapter, we walk beside the hoplite, shield in hand, silence on his lips, and Sparta in his heart. Rest now, if you wish. You have walked with mothers of iron. They will keep the flame until dawn. Chapter 5. The Warrior's Soul. To be a Spartan man was to carry the weight of the state upon one's shoulders, not in ceremony but in silence. From the completion of the Agoge, life entered its second phase, full membership in the ranks of the homoioi, the equals. But equality in Sparta meant uniformity, not comfort. It meant vigilance, preparation, and devotion to a single cause, the preservation of Sparta. The primary identity of the Spartan adult male was that of a hoplite, a heavily armed foot soldier trained to fight in the phalanx, the most disciplined and unified military formation of the ancient world. The phalanx was more than a tactic. It was a symbol. It required absolute trust, for each man's shield protected not just himself, but the man to his left. A break in discipline could doom the entire line. From 20 to 60, a Spartan man's life was dominated by military service. Although a man could marry at age 20, he did not live at home. He continued to reside in barracks and eat with his syssitia, a mess group of 15 or so fellow soldiers. These groups were essential. They functioned not only as military units, but as centers of loyalty and camaraderie. Admission required unanimous approval, and rejection could mean a life on the margins of Spartan society. Each man was responsible for contributing to his syssitia, bringing food and supplies from his estate, farmed by helots. Failure to meet one's obligation could result in expulsion and the loss of civic rights. Thus, even the landowning class lived under constant pressure to fulfill their duties. Training continued throughout adulthood. Spartans practiced regularly, maintained physical fitness, and adhered to strict codes of conduct. Discipline was internalized. Boasting was discouraged, as was emotional expression. Spartan valor was measured not in words, but in bearing. How one stood, how one fought, how one died. The daily life of a hoplite was not consumed with constant warfare. Battles were occasional, but the readiness for battle was permanent. Every motion, every rule, every relationship was shaped by the presumption that war could come at any time. Their armor was practical and intimidating: a bronze helmet, a breastplate, greaves, and the round hoplon shield. Their weapons included a short sword and a long spear, but their greatest weapon was unity. Enemies feared not individual Spartan warriors, but the wall they formed together. Rituals reinforced their identity. Before battle, men combed their hair and sang hymns. This was not vanity, but a final act of order before the chaos of combat. Spartans entered battle with calm, not frenzy. They moved as one, spoke little, and struck without hesitation. Cowardice was the great sin. A man who fled battle or showed fear might be branded a trembler, a social outcast. He would be shunned in public, denied marriage, and mocked even by children. Honor was not a personal possession. It was a debt to be paid to one's ancestors and one's city. Death in battle was the highest honor. A soldier who died bravely was remembered in songs and inscriptions. His name lived on. A man who returned having lost his shield, the symbol of his role in the phalanx, brought shame not only on himself, but on his entire family. Yet even warriors needed moments of reprieve. Sparta celebrated festivals and held athletic competitions. Religious observance was strong. Apollo, Artemis, and Athena were among the most revered gods. The festival of the Gymnopedia, where young men danced and performed martial songs in the nude, symbolized both discipline and devotion. Despite their martial culture, Spartans were not immune to philosophy. Some were educated in music, poetry, and ethics, always with the goal of reinforcing state values. Music was often choral and martial. Poetry was simple, often laconic, and glorified duty. The warrior's soul was not one of endless violence, but of constant readiness. He was taught to endure, to obey, and to fight, but also to wait, to listen, and to restrain. It was in that restraint that the true strength of Sparta lay. As we leave the field and the shielded wall behind, we descend into the shadows that surrounded Spartan greatness. The helots who sustained the city, and the quiet war waged to keep them subdued. Rest now, if you wish. The shield is still beside you. The line still holds. Chapter 6: Eternal War, Helots and Shadows. Beneath the polished armor of Sparta's warriors, beneath the chants and silence of its rituals, there was another Sparta, hidden in fields and fear, sustained by shadows. The city's strength was not built by warriors alone. It rested upon the shoulders of the helots. The helots were not slaves in the typical sense. They were not bought or sold at market. They were the conquered, the subjugated people of Laconia and Messenia, bound to the land they worked. Generations of helots toiled in Sparta's fields, raising crops, tending flocks, producing goods, all so that Spartan citizens could devote their lives to training, war, and ritual. Their status was ambiguous and precarious. They had families and homes, but no freedom. They could not leave their land, could not defend themselves in court, and lived under constant surveillance. Every harvest, they owed a fixed portion of their produce to their Spartan overlords. The rest they kept, if Spartan agents permitted it. The helots outnumbered the Spartans perhaps by 7 to 1. This imbalance created a constant undercurrent of fear within Spartan society. A fear that rebellion might come at any moment, that the silence in the fields might turn to war cries in the night. To control this population, Sparta developed a brutal system of oppression. Chief among these was the Crypteia, a secret institution often described as both rite of passage and instrument of terror. Selected youths from the Agoge were sent into the countryside under cover of darkness. They carried daggers and rations, and they had one command: to observe, to intimidate, and to kill any helot deemed too strong, too outspoken, or simply too confident. This was not war in the open. It was psychological warfare. It served to remind the Helots that their lives were never truly their own. It also hardened the young Spartans, teaching them not just to fight, but to dominate. The Spartans did not disguise this practice. They declared war on the Helots annually through a ritual proclamation, thereby sidestepping religious prohibitions against killing fellow Greeks. In doing so, they legalized a state of perpetual internal warfare. Yet the Helots endured. Despite centuries of subjugation, they preserved traditions, families, and faith. In Messenia especially, their resistance was legendary. There were uprisings, most notably the Great Revolt following a devastating earthquake in the 460s BCE. The tremors weakened Sparta's defenses, and the Helots rose. The war lasted years. It was one of Sparta's greatest internal crises. Even in times of peace, Helot life was harsh. Their clothing was coarse. They were forced to perform humiliating rituals, such as being paraded drunk during public festivals to demonstrate the dangers of excess. Their suffering was institutionalized, and yet, through endurance, they persisted. This dependence on an oppressed class shaped Spartan policy. Sparta was conservative by necessity. It resisted innovation, distrusted foreign influence, and avoided overseas colonies. Unlike Athens, which thrived on trade and openness, Sparta remained closed, wary of any change that might destabilize the fragile balance between rulers and ruled. The presence of the Helots also explains Sparta's obsession with discipline. The rigid control of its own citizens was mirrored by the control imposed upon the Helots. The same fear that kept the Spartan warrior lean and silent also kept the Helot bent and watchful. Philosophers and historians of the time were divided in their judgment. Some admired the Spartans' order and resilience. Others condemned the cruelty that sustained it. Aristotle criticized Sparta's dependence on the Helots, warning that any society built on fear and suppression was unstable at its core. Indeed, as Spartan military power waned in later centuries, the Helots gained leverage. After Sparta's defeat at Leuctra in 371 BCE, the city could no longer hold its grip on Messenia. The Helots there eventually gained their freedom, and with it, a voice long denied. But for centuries, the Helots remained invisible pillars of Spartan society, silenced, controlled, and yet essential. Their presence haunted the quiet of Spartan fields, a living reminder that no power, no matter how disciplined, is ever absolute. In the next chapter, we return to the visible architecture of power, the kings and councils, the elders and assemblies, the carefully balanced system of governance that ruled the Spartan state. Rest now, if you wish. You have walked the unseen roads. The soil remembers every step. Chapter 7. The Kings and the Gerousia. Sparta was a city obsessed with balance, between austerity and strength, between the visible and the concealed, and nowhere was this clearer than in its system of governance. Unlike many other Greek polis, Sparta did not evolve into a democracy or a tyranny. It built a unique structure, carefully layered to resist both disorder and ambition. At the top of the political hierarchy stood two kings. This dual kingship was not symbolic. Both monarchs wielded real authority. Descended, it was believed, from the legendary Heraclidae, the kings ruled not as rivals, but as complements. One led the army in war, while the other remained in Sparta, safeguarding domestic order. Together, they embodied continuity. By dividing the highest power, Sparta hoped to avoid the excesses of one-man rule. Yet kingship in Sparta was not absolute. The kings were subject to oversight, ceremony, and tradition. Their power, while prestigious, was bound by law and limited by counsel. The most powerful check on royal authority came from the Gerousia, the Council of Elders. Composed of 28 men over the age of 60, along with the two kings, The Gerousia was the heart of deliberation in Sparta. Membership was for life and determined by acclamation, an early form of voting in which candidates were presented to the citizen assembly, and the volume of applause determined the outcome. These elders were not merely advisors. They proposed laws, served as judges in capital cases, and could even override decisions made by the citizen assembly. Their age brought status, their experience, reverence. In a culture that prized discipline and restraint, the Gerousia represented the culmination of a lifetime of such virtues. Below them was the Apella, the assembly of Spartan citizens, composed of all male Spartiates over the age of 30. The Apella could vote on proposals made by the Gerousia, but could not debate or introduce legislation. This was no open forum for oratory, as in Athens. The Spartan ideal was not persuasion but consensus. The vote was public, usually conducted by shouting or acclamation. Majority was judged not by count, but by volume. A fourth institution maintained balance, the ephors. 5 in number, elected annually from among the citizens, the ephors wielded immense power. They supervised the kings, oversaw education, conducted foreign policy, and convened the assembly. In theory, they represented the people. In practice, they were guardians of stability. Each year, the ephors could bring the kings to trial if necessary. Their terms were limited to 1 year, preventing the consolidation of personal power. Unlike the kings or Gerousia, the ephorate was more open to men of various backgrounds, so long as they were full citizens. This office ensured that no part of the government operated without accountability. The checks and balances of the Spartan constitution, attributed to Lycurgus and refined over generations, created a durable system. Slow to change, cautious in nature, but remarkably stable. While Athens swung between tyranny and democracy, Sparta maintained equilibrium. But this stability came at a cost. The rigidity of the Spartan system, while effective in preserving internal order, resisted reform even in the face of external change. There was no place for innovation, only for preservation. This conservatism, once a strength, would later contribute to Sparta's decline. Nevertheless, during its height, the Spartan constitution was admired, even envied. Philosophers such as Plato saw in its order a model for an ideal state. Xenophon praised its clarity and efficiency, its dual kingship, senior council, citizen assembly, and executive magistrates worked in careful tension, reflecting the city's deeper values: unity, hierarchy, restraint. Governance in Sparta was not a matter of public passion, it was a ritual of duty. The system discouraged individual ambition, emphasizing service to the collective. In this way, even politics became a form of discipline. As we step away from the council chamber, we approach the battlefield again, not of domestic order, but of national survival. The next chapter brings us to the Persian Wars, where Sparta's ideals were tested in fire. Rest now if you wish. The laws still hold, and in silence, the city endures. Chapter 8. The Persian Wars. Silence and fire. When the vast armies of Persia turned their gaze westward, the cities of Greece faced a question not only of survival, but of identity. In this crucible of fire, Sparta stood apart, not for its eloquence or diplomacy, but for its silence, its will, and its steel. The Persian threat first emerged in the late 6th century BCE. By 490 BCE, the Achaemenid Empire under Darius I had already subjugated much of the eastern Mediterranean. When Athens supported the Ionian revolt, it drew Persia's attention and wrath. At Marathon, the Athenians stood largely alone. Sparta had been called to assist, but religious obligations prevented immediate action. A festival, the Carnea, sacred to Apollo, barred the Spartans from marching to war until it ended. By the time their army arrived, the battle had been won. This moment, though awkward, revealed much about Sparta. Religion and ritual were not symbolic. They were binding. Even in the face of existential threat, order came first. But the true test came 10 years later, under Xerxes, son of Darius. The Second Persian invasion was vast. A colossal army crossed the Hellespont and marched into Greece, accompanied by a navy that dominated the Aegean. This time, Sparta moved. They were named to lead the Hellenic League, a coalition of Greek states formed to resist Persia. Athens provided ships, Sparta, men, and leadership. The most iconic moment of this campaign came at the narrow pass of Thermopylae in 480 BCE. There, a small Greek force led by King Leonidas of Sparta held the pass for 3 days against an overwhelming Persian force. Leonidas brought with him just 300 Spartans. Elite warriors chosen not for their youth, but for their maturity and strength. Alongside them fought several thousand allies from other city-states, but it was the Spartans who held the center. They fought with precision, patience, and silence. When told the Persian arrows would block out the sun, a Spartan replied, "Then we will fight in the shade." When offered surrender, Leonidas answered with 2 words, "Molon Labe," come and take them. Eventually, the Persians discovered a hidden path around the pass, and Leonidas, knowing defeat was imminent, dismissed most of his allies. He and his men remained, to delay, to resist, and to die. Their sacrifice became legend. Though the battle was lost, its symbolism echoed throughout Greece. It proved that Persia could be resisted. It reminded the Greeks of what was at stake: freedom, self-rule, and honor. In the months that followed, the Persian advance continued. Athens was burned, but the tide turned at sea. At Salamis, the Greek navy, led by the cunning of Themistocles and bolstered by Athenian ships, routed the Persians. At Plataea in 479 BCE, a united Greek army with Sparta at its core defeated the remaining Persian forces on land. Sparta's role in these wars was not flashy. Its soldiers did not make rousing speeches. Its generals did not seek glory, but their discipline and sacrifice were indispensable. After the war, Athens rose as a cultural and naval power, forming the Delian League. Sparta, by contrast, returned home. It had no desire for empire. Its warriors returned not to celebration, but to order. They had defended Greece and resumed training. These wars revealed both the strength and the limits of Sparta. It could rise when needed, stand with iron resolve, and inspire through action. But it would not lead in peace. Its structure was too inward, too fixed. Yet the memory of Thermopylae, of Leonidas and his 300, endured far beyond the fields of Plataea. It became the ultimate expression of Spartan virtue: courage without boast, sacrifice without fear, death with dignity. In the next chapter, we watch as Sparta rises to dominance, not only as a protector, but as a power in its own right, leading Greece through war, but also toward a darker kind of triumph. Rest now, if you wish. The fire has passed, but the embers still glow in stone and memory. Chapter 9. The Peloponnesian War, Discipline in Decline. After the fires of the Persian Wars cooled, Greece did not find peace. Instead, it drifted into a slow, inevitable conflict, not with a foreign empire, but within itself. At the heart of this new struggle stood the 2 greatest powers of the Greek world, Athens and Sparta. They were opposites in nearly every way. Athens thrived on trade, art, and argument. It was open, loud, and daring. Sparta was austere, inward, and silent. Athens built an empire by sea. Sparta commanded land, discipline, and fear. The tension between them simmered for decades until war became unavoidable. The Peloponnesian War began in 431 BCE and lasted in phases for nearly 3 decades. It was not a single war, but a series of campaigns, truces, betrayals, and battles. For Sparta, it marked both the height of its power and the beginning of its unraveling. At the war's outset, Sparta relied on its traditional strengths, its hoplite army, its alliances in the Peloponnesian League, and its reputation. It marched on Athenian territory, but lacked the naval power to strike at the heart of Athens. Meanwhile, Athens used its fleet to harass the Peloponnesian coast and supply its empire. In 425 BCE, Sparta suffered a rare humiliation. At the Battle of Pylos, over 100 Spartan soldiers were captured, a shock to the Greek world. Sparta had built its image on invincibility and self-sacrifice. The surrender of its warriors, however reluctant, tarnished that image. Sparta adapted. With help from allies and later from Persia, it began to build a navy. Leadership shifted from traditional kings to generals like Lysander. Ambitious, cunning, and willing to adopt foreign tactics. Sparta's victories at sea, including the decisive Battle of Agoge in 405 BCE, turned the tide. The Athenian fleet was destroyed. The city was starved. In 404 BCE, Athens surrendered. Sparta stood victorious. It imposed an oligarchy on Athens, the so-called 30 tyrants, and dismantled its empire. For the first time, Sparta held dominance over all of Greece. And yet, the cost was high. Victory did not bring stability. The Spartan system, designed for internal unity and defense, was ill-suited for imperial rule. Occupying cities required garrisons, diplomacy, and resources. The traditional suspicion of wealth and foreign influence began to crack. Spartans grew rich from war spoils. Land ownership became unequal. Discipline waned. The citizen body, always small, began to shrink further as fewer young men qualified for full status. Discontent stirred not just among the Helots, but within the allied cities. The harshness of Spartan rule bred resentment. Rebellions flared. Former allies turned away. Lysander, once a hero, became a divisive figure. His wealth, power, and influence unsettled the traditional order. His assassination in 395 BCE marked a turning point, a rejection of both his ambition and the changes he embodied. The Corinthian War soon followed, with Sparta fighting a coalition of former allies and enemies. Though Sparta retained military strength, the unity and clarity of purpose that had defined it for centuries were fading. The war that had once tested Spartan discipline now revealed its limits. Adaptation brought victory, but also compromise. The rigid order of Lycurgus, once unshakable, had begun to bend. In the next chapter, we watch the consequences unfold. As Thebes rises, Leuctra is fought, and the myth of Spartan invincibility is broken. Rest now if you wish. The war is won, but something deeper has been lost. Chapter 10. The Fall of Sparta. In the early 4th century BCE, Sparta stood atop a fractured world, victorious, feared, but no longer unshaken. Its discipline had delivered conquest, but not cohesion. Its strength had won empire, but not endurance. The years that followed its triumph over Athens would reveal the fragility beneath the armor. The most decisive blow came not from Persia or Athens, but from Thebes. Once an ally, now a rival. The Thebans had watched Sparta's rise with growing alarm. Their city, often overshadowed by its neighbors, began to cultivate a new strength, both military and political. The decisive confrontation came in 371 BCE at the Battle of Leuctra. There, in the plains of Boeotia, a new form of warfare was born. The Theban general Epaminondas abandoned traditional hoplite tactics. Instead of placing his best troops on the right, as was custom, he massed them on the left, concentrating force against the elite Spartan line. The result was devastating. The Sacred Band of Thebes, a unit composed of 150 pairs of male lovers bound by loyalty and affection, charged with precision. Their strength broke through the Spartan right. where the king Cleombrotus I fell in battle. The famed Spartan phalanx, for centuries considered invincible, was shattered. This defeat was not just tactical, it was spiritual. It marked the first time a full Spartan army had been beaten in open battle by a Greek foe. The illusion of invincibility, so carefully crafted since Thermopylae, dissolved. The consequences were profound. The Thebans marched into the Peloponnese. They liberated Messenia, long enslaved, and founded the city of Messene. For the first time in centuries, Helots tasted freedom. Sparta's agricultural backbone was torn away. The decline accelerated. The rigid Spartan system could not adapt to change. Its population of full citizens continued to shrink, a result of both battlefield losses and social stratification. Wealth, once shunned, now corrupted. Discipline gave way to comfort. The values of Lycurgus were invoked in name, but not in practice. Efforts at reform came too late. Kings like Agis IV and Cleomenes III attempted to restore equality and discipline, redistributing land and reviving old laws. But internal resistance and external pressure doomed their efforts. By the time Rome entered the Greek world, Sparta was no longer a power, but a symbol, preserved more by legend than by strength. Yet Sparta did not vanish. It lingered. Its people endured. Its name echoed. Even stripped of empire, Sparta remained a site of pilgrimage, a fascination for philosophers, generals, and poets. Its legacy lived on in Roman admiration, in Renaissance political theory, in the writings of Plutarch and Xenophon, and in the imaginations of those who sought a purer, simpler order. But the Sparta that once was, the city of silence, shields, and stone, was gone. In the next chapter, we turn not to battles or laws, but to memory itself, to the myth of Sparta and the soul it left behind. Rest now if you wish. The shield has fallen, but the echo remains. Chapter 11: The Soul That Remained. Even after Sparta's fall from power, its presence lingered, not as a force on the battlefield, but as a force in the mind. Though the phalanx no longer marched and the laws of Lycurgus no longer ruled the valley of the Eurotas, the idea of Sparta remained sharp, defined, and strangely immortal. In the centuries that followed its decline, Sparta became more myth than city. Its ruins told little of its former greatness. No grand temples, no expansive agoras, no theaters echoing with speech. Yet for many, that absence spoke volumes. Sparta had built itself not in marble, but in men. And even in defeat, that legacy remained. Greek philosophers looked back with fascination. Xenophon, a contemporary admirer, praised Sparta's institutions and discipline. Plutarch, writing centuries later under Roman rule, devoted entire works to Spartan customs, sayings, and kings. He described them not just as warriors, but as moral examples, citizens forged in fire, capable of silence in pain, of sacrifice without hesitation. For the Romans too, Sparta held allure. They saw in its simplicity a cure for decadence. Cato the Elder studied its laws. Augustus admired its order. Military reformers and moralists held up Sparta as a mirror to their own fading virtues. In the Renaissance, as Europe looked backward to move forward, Sparta re-emerged again, a model of order, strength, and civic unity. Political thinkers like Machiavelli and Rousseau debated its merits. Some saw a utopia of equality and discipline. Others, a dystopia of repression and cruelty. Modern nationalism, too, borrowed from Sparta. In the 19th and 20th centuries, its name was invoked by those who admired martial strength, communal identity, and sacrifice, sometimes as inspiration, sometimes as warning. And always the image persisted, men in formation, shields aligned, eyes forward, silent. Yet what remained, truly, of Sparta? The city itself faded into a quiet provincial existence. Its people lived on, but the system that once defined them dissolved. The Agoge was gone, the Syssitia abandoned, the kingship reduced, the rituals silenced. But the soul of Sparta, the idea, endured. It endured in paradox. A city that rejected writing became one of the most written about. A society that discouraged speech became known for its words. A people who built no monuments left behind an unshakable image. The Spartan soul survives not in what it built, but in what it meant. It is the discipline to endure hardship, the silence before the charge, the belief that courage, not comfort, is the true measure of life. And so we remember them, not because they conquered, but because they committed, because they lived not for glory, but for form, because their failure was not ordinary, but epic. In the final chapter, we step away from history and enter the timeless, into a meditation on what Sparta can still teach us, about will, simplicity, and the quiet power of restraint. Rest now if you wish. The voices have faded, but the soul remains, waiting in the stillness of memory.